So, welcome to our June Maths Network. We're going to be focusing on the strand of cardinality and counting. There will be some images throughout, and these are taken mostly at our lead setting at Charles Dickens Primary School and Nursery. These children are from the nursery, and when we're talking about maths, we know that yes, it's really useful to have little group times where you introduce new language to the children, but it's also really important that we join the children in their continuous provision and in their self-chosen tasks. And this image shows a typical situation where children are building. And I would suggest that rather than mention how many blocks they're using, or start counting them, you might say, oh, could I join in? And they might say, okay, then you can do that bit of the car. And you could say, well, how many blocks do I need for this? How many can I use? You can introduce the idea of quantity and amount by getting them to stipulate how many you can use. And that way, you're getting them to set the rules of their game, and they're more likely to encourage you to be part of their game. It shows that you're being highly respectful that they've started this play. So our aims today are to understand the strand of cardinality and counting. What does it look like? We'll look at ways to help children develop the understanding of this strand. And we need to always think of our early years context and how to make this engaging, playful, intentional. Here, for instance, I showed this image in the last network meeting where we were talking about problem solving. You can just as well be using something like the tangram in cardinality and counting, because the amount of shapes that you have within the tangram is really key. So you can be drawing attention to the children that you need to make sure you have all 7 of the tangram pieces. Remember, we always have 7 shapes in our tangram. And what this helps with is the idea of numerosity, regardless of the size of things. And you've got a really nice situation here where you have shapes of different sizes. So if we look at our statutory framework, they talk very clearly about number sense, and they also talk about how the base knowledge is what we're aiming for in mathematics, and that vocabulary is very important. The vocabulary from which mastery of mathematics is built. So whichever strand we're looking at, it's really helpful as practitioners to think about the key words and the key phrases that you might be using to emphasize that strand. And we'll have a look at a few of those words as we go today. So the cardinal value of a number refers to the quantity, the howmanyness of things it represents. So this child here is showing that he knows he has 3 ducks. He's also chosen the symbol that represents that amount, which is a very useful skill to be developing as well. But do remember, with our children who are at the initial stages of understanding quantity, it may not be the right time to be combining the quantity with the numeral, depending on whether they need that foundational skill before introducing the numeral. When we look at how children acquire this understanding sequentially, the numeral comes a little later. If they are very fluent in reading the numerals, you can very possibly combine the 2 things, but we do need to spend time really observing and understanding where the children are with those 2 separate skills before combining them. So counting is one way of establishing how many things are in a group, because the last number you say tells you how many there are. Children enjoy learning the sequence of counting well before they understand the cardinal values of the numbers they're saying. So that sequence of saying the numerals, saying the numbers, is quite different to the act of counting a precise number of objects or a precise number of actions. Subitizing is another way of recognizing how many there are without counting. So these quotes come from the National Centre of Excellence of Teaching Mathematics. They are the organisation behind the Maths Hubs. So if you do require further support with mathematical development, the Maths Hubs do offer lots of support in this area. And also on the last screen today, I will put the slide for you joining the program which we are offering through the Early Years Stronger Practice Hub, so that you can apply for that as well, which is a year-long program. Here I am drawing attention to the Education Endowment Foundation's evidence store, where you can find the 5 approaches that are supported by educational research to support children in making accelerated progress in their maths. And you can see the first 2 approaches of teaching the association between number and quantity and promoting fluency with numbers and sequences are the 2 that are absolutely linked to the idea of cardinality and counting. So well worth having a look at those approaches on the evidence store. The evidence tells us that building fluency has a positive impact on children's mathematical development. As children's fluency develops, their recall of the sequence becomes faster and more accurate. This enables them to apply their knowledge more readily in other areas and improves their mathematical learning. So this really is about fluency. And remember, when a child can show us that they touch one object as they go per word that they say, they are counting. They may use the incorrect word, but they are showing us that they understand the idea of one-to-one correspondence. The label they use may be muddled, and that's where we can play lots of games for them to say the words in the correct sequence, and that will really help them with their fluency. In our continuous provision, we may provide interesting tactile objects that encourage children to count particular amounts. We might have squidgy dough that we encourage the children to take little bits of so that they are making little balls or little sausages, and are being very precise about how many of those they put into a container, maybe to set up a shop. Really think about how you weave this idea into some imaginative role play that the children are fascinated with. When you're being really precise, it might lend itself to setting up a shop where so many objects need to be in a particular place, where you're organizing the materials in your shop very precisely. And weaving in that idea of precision is where the counting out of the objects is going to be really important and really exciting for the children. I've put a link here to the problem-solving, reasoning and numeracy document that was written many moons ago and is also very useful for practitioner development, for CPD within your own teams. Lots of wonderful ideas. And this is one of the images from that document around how important it is to have real life situations like podding peas or beans, and then having interesting containers in which to organize those very exciting beans that are found inside the pod. These recommendations from the problem solving, reasoning and numeracy document also resonate with this strand. By valuing children's partial understanding, children will develop enthusiasm for number and become confident mathematicians. So that's really about us noticing what the children are able to do and what they are showing us they can do. We really need to move away from any sort of correction or test-like interactions with the children, but rather comment on what they were doing and what they noticed. It's important to acknowledge all children's counting and to be aware of their developing competence. So like earlier, I gave the example of a child who might be giving a label that is not in the sequence of the count, but yet they are doing the one-to-one correspondence. So if they go through saying 1, 6, 9, 4, you may say, yes, we do have 4 objects there, 1, 2, 3, 4, and rephrase and do that in such a way that you're encouraging them and you're acknowledging that they did count out 4. They pointed to each object, one after the other. Carefully select number rhymes to include those that children are familiar with from home. Find out what they maybe have been singing in their play groups or in their previous provision, if they were in a nursery before they came to you. Always useful to know what their prior knowledge is, which rhymes are familiar for them. 10 in the bed is often one that is sung, and you can replicate that with cuddly toys. Really important that when you do introduce rhymes, you have representations so that the children can visualize how many you're talking about. And if, like in 10 in the bed, and you're taking one away each time, they can really see that and they can participate in that. The same for 10 green bottles. You may not have the real glass bottles, but you may have some plastic bottles that you might find safer to use. You might have these as laminated pictures that you can Velcro on and Velcro off as you sing. So the children need to be saying number words in sequence. This is something that we are striving for the children to be able to do. They would initially be doing this to 5 and then to 10. Now, yes, you will have some children who want to go beyond, and that's very exciting, but you need to know that they are developing mastery within 10. So once you have the cardinality and counting up to 10 nailed, it's really important to be looking at the other strands. So the patterns that they can find within there, the idea of conservation, so the amount not changing when you rearrange those 10 objects in different ways and put them far apart, seeing numbers within a number. Very important to be doing all that consolidation work within 10 rather than racing ahead to get to higher numbers. Children are very attracted to higher numbers, and you may have children talking about thousands and hundreds, and that's to be encouraged, but make sure the mastery within 10 is absolutely happening. Counting back is also a really useful skill and much harder than counting forward because you have to use your working memory much more. Tagging each object with one number word can be done in all sorts of situations. Here again, we've got children who have harvested the seed pods of the runner beans. So this is happening in the autumn term when the harvest generally happens. And if you do have growing spaces, do encourage your premises to make sure that they do not clear away all of the seed pods that are going to be available on your site, because those seed pods offer some really exciting counting opportunities. You can use the peas, the beans, the sweet peas even. They're quite small seeds. Runner beans give you really big ones, broad beans even bigger, although they would be harvested much earlier in the year. But do consider having those real life objects that just lend themselves to being counted. Children find them really fascinating. Here they're collecting precise amounts into these pots so that they can be sold at an international evening happening at the setting. So children need lots of different opportunities of how to do this. And here they give the example of how many people are in the sandpit. So quite random amounts that might be very far away from each other. So it's not always an easy amount to count because all of the objects are gathered into a small space. These opportunities can include counting things that cannot be seen, like claps or jumps. Knowing the last number counted gives you the total so far is language that we need to use with the children, really important. In a role play situation such as the shop, you can give children opportunities to count out the amount of aubergines they're selling to the customer. It makes it really meaningful. They may tag an amount of money to a particular object, and you want to simplify that as much as possible so that it's achievable and the children are more likely to use that type of mathematical language. And it's also really important that children are taking from a larger group. They're not always counting the amount of objects that are there in the basket. Like we can see there's one aubergine there. It might be really useful to count out from the basket of food that the child is bringing there. When you count out from a larger amount, you have to remember to stop. So the customer might say, I can only afford to buy 3 of these things. And the shopkeeper might say, okay, you can put your 3 chosen objects into this basket and pay £3 for those. And that gives the child the opportunity to show that they can be very precise in counting out their 3. And they remember to stop. A common misconception is that a child will continue counting out until they've counted everything that's in the basket. So that notion of stopping at the amount that has been stipulated is a really, really important milestone for the children. You want to provide opportunities for children to make number lines. So this is when you are combining the numeral with the amount. If you're doing this outside, you've got the opportunity to do it on a much larger scale, involve movement, going around to collect the correct amount of objects. You can use Numicon to support the one-to-one correspondence of those objects. You can then refine this ability by playing very simple games in a small group where children all have a chance to contribute to the number line. And incidentally, if you do have number lines in your spaces, make sure that below the numeral there are representations of that amount so that those numerals are not abstract, just symbols in the environment, but that they stand for a precise amount. That could be with dots, that could be with objects that are real, or it could be with photographs. So subitizing is about recognizing small quantities without needing to count them. And that is another way of recognizing quantity or cardinality. So the most common way for children to develop subitizing skills is to use dice. And you'll have opportunities to use dice in simple games that you invent or simple board games like this little snail trail here, where the children are invested in having a turn. The more they are exposed to the dice, the more likely they are to recognize the different configurations of the dots. They start recognizing 3 quite quickly and 2. And with the symmetrical arrangement of the 4 and the 5 and the 6, they actually develop recognizing those amounts much more easily. And you find that you can replicate that skill when you're arranging amounts of objects on the carpet, for instance. If you're playing the game of the missing object, you might have things underneath a scarf or a blanket, and the children have to see which one is missing. You might arrange those in a predictable die-like way where the children can very easily see how many there are underneath and how many then go missing. So remember to tap into what you know the children have as prior knowledge and prior experiences. So yes, you will then go on to the numeral meanings. So we're looking sequentially at how children acquire the understanding of cardinality. They go through counting things in their continuous provision, in play-like situations, within small groups. And then we draw attention to what those numerals mean and regularly add an amount to that numeral to reinforce it. The idea of having that in the environment in your number lines is so that no misconceptions start building before they have this skill. And then it's a number line that you can refer back to so that children can use that number line to work things out. So they may have really clear understanding of what 4 is, but they don't yet recognize the numeral, but they can go to the number line to work out which number 4 is because they know what 4 objects is, and they can discover, that's the numeral I need. And that's often the way round that children acquire understanding. And so important that we're not missing the step of understanding the amount. There are those children who recognize and read the numerals very fluently, but do not understand what they stand for. So we need to provide the opportunities with wooden numerals, calculators, handwritten examples of number alongside the quantity. So the idea of conservation is what I spoke about earlier, where you have a specific amount. So in this picture, the children have got 6 balls out. Actually, one is being held by one of the children. So he's got 7 out. And they are arranging them in different ways, but noticing that they still have 7. Wherever they put the balls, their amount doesn't change. They just can express it and show it in different ways. They can spread them out. They can put them close together. They can put them into the holes. They can hold a few and put some into the numicon. And what's interesting is noticing the different ways that they arrange them. The idea of conservation is that the amount does not change. The same with the child who's outside and has the calendula flowers. She's arranging those in such a way that it's easy for her to count them. Now, some children may find it easiest if they arrange them in a line, and that way they can be very methodical about how they count them. And you can talk about clumping them all up into one place and moving them from one side to the other to check how many there are. Move them around. Do we have the same amount? Yes, we do, because we haven't taken any away and we haven't put any in. And one of the ideas that they've shared with us is that idea of correcting a puppet, who may say that there are more or fewer objects because they've been rearranged. And that's always a very nice tactic to use with the children, teaching the puppet. So it's taking it away from them and teaching that puppet that actually they stay the same regardless of how they're arranged. They could be spread out or they could be pushed together. So if we're thinking about the language that we want all our practitioners to be using in this area of cardinality and counting, it's really useful to introduce the words quantity, amount. That means how many. We know that we will have 5 if we stop at 5 when we count them out. So using that language really clearly so that the children can then use that same language to explain what they are doing. So introducing the idea of the stopping number. If you are being very precise with introducing this language, you might say, oh, remember, we need to have 10 apples in our basket or 5 apples in our basket. And then you'll say, so what's the stopping number? 5, yes. Okay, so it's going to be 5 that we stop at. Can you help me do that? Okay. And off you go and you start the count. And they might forget to stop, at which point you can remind them, oh, hang on, what was our stopping number? And draw attention to that language. And obviously the word counting. And when you introduce the word counting, you might want to be using the language of arrange. I find it easier to count my objects when I arrange them in a line, or when I take them from one side to the other. Or it really helps me when I plop them into a bucket, and I only say my number when I hear it plop in. So really think about the techniques that you'll use with different children. Notice where their gaps are so you can then support them with their understanding. With our very, very youngest learners, we will be using words like 1, 2, 3, probably not go beyond, because we don't want to overload. We don't want to give our youngest learners too much language to have to put to an action. You'll do clapping with very young children. You'll be filling a box, blowing the dandelion clock, inserting into an insert puzzle, or eating the raspberries or the strawberries that are in season at the moment. And those are all opportunities for using that numeral language early with our very, very youngest. You might use texts to support and reinforce the idea of cardinality, quantity, and counting. So here, for instance, you've got the lovely story of Baby Goes to Market. This is a lovely image from our childminder partner, Annette, who uses this book in her childminder setting and uses these lovely bean bags that have the representations of the amounts and combines that with the amount of objects so that there's this richness of supporting the child with recognizing the numeral, noticing and working out the exact amount, and also using something like a 5 frame to help with that one-to-one correspondence, and also with taking it further and seeing how many are left. And she's doing a little bit of early taking away here, which both Hand a Surprise and Baby Goes to Market lend themselves to. Pete the Cat and his 4 groovy buttons is another really nice text to use with the younger learners, and really nice to replicate, actually, having buttons as a resource in your settings. Really tactile, lovely things to count. Another lovely book with real photographs in it is One Child, One Seed. Some children find it more interesting to spot real objects from real photographs if they're more interested in non-fiction texts, for instance. We need to cater for those children as well. And you've seen this image already, that idea of reinforcing the value of numerals through simple games that you can make up with the children. The more little games that you have, the more little challenges you can provide for the children. So we could conclude that cardinality and counting connects the approach of developing fluency in counting and teaching the association between number and quantity. Both approaches that are supported by the educational research. So we're being evidence informed by using those approaches. Practitioners need to consider their environments, resources, and interactions to bring these approaches to life. So really thinking about your planning, the type of activities that you want to introduce, where you might be able to reinforce cardinality and counting in your routines. It might be when you go through a transition. It may be when you're setting the table for lunchtime, or when you're arranging your resources, when you're tidying things away. And you may want to consider the types of resources you have. Or do they lend themselves to being counted? Is that something exciting for the children? Do you have bowls and containers that things can be counted into? How do you teach cardinality and counting? It'd be really nice to hear from you the types of strategies that you use, the types of resources that you found to be really helpful, and if there are any activities that have been particularly popular in reaching all children. So practical pedagogical points to support counting, as mentioned in several different guidance documents that we have. Support children's play inside and outside with a mathematically challenging environment. So really do think about having those opportunities both inside and outside. We know that some children prefer spending time outside. Can we make the need to count our actions, our large movements, super playful? Are there opportunities to tally and do some early recording of amounts? Provide an environment where children can self-select the resources they want to use to make their own number lines. So is that something that you can easily introduce, that idea of making your own number line? And that can be a challenge that we ask children to go away and create. Listen to and observe children to understand their mathematical thinking. So really notice how children are understanding amounts without having too many preconceived ideas of what we expect. Prior learning from home really seeps in to how children understand this area. Make regular times for small group discussions about children's own personal mathematical problem solving. That was something recommended in the problem solving, reasoning and numeracy document. And then we spoke about the number lines representing amounts beneath the numerals. We've also produced a series of brief explainers. So if you want to have a look on our website, we have a one-page explainer if you want to share this with people in your setting or parents even really simple little ideas of how to reinforce this area. Approach number 2, which is promoting fluency with numbers and sequences, is the one that relates to cardinality and counting. So we've written this tiny explainer that you could use. I've also put in a really nice video here about supporting early number sense from Siren Films. I highly recommend you have a look at that. They mention adult support works best when it's responsive and observational rather than directive or corrective. And they suggest that as you watch, you try to observe how the adult supports the learning, not just what the child can already do. Often when we're observing in a video, we may feel like we're doing that observational work. But actually, what's really, really useful for us is to see the practice that the adult is using, to see how they are facilitating thinking in the children. And we've got lots of documents here for you to refer back to that have been mentioned in this document. And here's the slide that I promised. If you want to know more, if you're at a stage where you can dedicate a year to a program to develop your team's mathematical understanding and knowledge, Maths Champions is a great program. It's a year-long program where you need to have one maths champion and one deputy champion engage with sequential CPD over a year, and it's fully funded. You can scan the code here if you want to know more, and you can apply for this program through us. So if there's more work that you want to do and you are a nursery setting, this is for you. I'm sorry, it's not yet for others. It's just for those who are in a nursery setting. That can be a PVI or non-PVI. It just needs to be a registered nursery. And do get involved with us. These are our details. If you're not already on these platforms, do